All right, we have reached our last section, 16.4, the collapse of Reconstruction. Make sure you have turned all your documents in because we're getting near the end of the unit, and I might have to throw a due date on you so you can make sure that you're on top of your game. So, 16.4, sharecropping. Let's keep in mind that most of the Southerners and most of wanted to maintain that antebellum South social order. In other words, white supremacy, to put it quite bluntly. And they wanted to keep the African Americans, the freed slaves, from achieving. And there's two farming systems that did this, because keep in mind too that most of the freed slaves, their skill was farming. One was a crop lean system. They would rent out equipment. Of course, they would charge a lot of money for this equipment. They would even as renting out to the freedmen, they would actually require some of the crop to come to them. This is intended to keep the borrowers financially dependent on the lenders, so African Americans can never actually amass enough wealth to own their own land. Same thing was intended with sharecropping, in which land was basically leased, kind of like a tenant farmer in a sense. And they would, again, let them lease the land. The borrowers would financially become dependent on the lenders. Lenders would obviously change rates and stuff like that to keep the African Americans deprived of amassing any wealth. Now, the invisible empire of the South. Who really ruled? This was the formation of the notorious Ku Klux Klan, which terrorized four different groups of people in order to maintain that social order of the antebellum South. One, the freedmen, the former slaves, were obviously the target. They did not want them practicing their civil liberties, specifically the right to vote. Another group that was terrorized, the Union League and the Freedmen's Bureau officials, who were trying to establish what they called Negro rule. That means they were putting African Americans into different positions. They also attacked the carpetbaggers, which were Northerners who came to the South and tried to exploit the weakness of the South after the Civil War. And the fourth group, the Scalawags, Southerners who supported Reconstruction. That's just a cool word, Scalawags. Say it with me, Scalawags. All right. So, in response to the KKK, the federal government wanted to push more Reconstruction efforts, and what they did is they sent federal troops to impose martial law, and they passed a series of laws known as the Enforcement Acts. So Grant did not take this matter lightly. Southerners who resisted this federal intervention became known as Redeemers, and they complained that the Reconstruction Acts were unfair, primarily because they were the ones being taxed on their property. Their taxes would go to the Freedmen Bureau, which in essence allowed African Americans free education and food. So they thought that it was making the freedmen inherently lazy. The Republican Party influence also began to dwindle, creating another problem. This happened for two major reasons. One, the Panic of 1873, when one of the most powerful banks fell into bankruptcy, and thus the financial recession was felt. The other thing was some scandals by Ulysses S. Grant, namely the Whiskey Ring, Credit Mobilier, and the Tammany Hall, all of which will be discussed on westward migration and industrialization. So the only purpose for this unit is to know that these scandals weaken his ability to rule, because whenever there's a scandal, of course, people begin to lack trust in their federal government. Unless, well, I won't go there. Never mind. He can do anything, get away with it. All right. The contested election of 1876. In 1876, the Republicans realized that Grant was not going to be able to carry a third term due to his lack of popularity in the corruptions and the hurting economy. So they nominated Rutherford B. Hayes. Democrats nominated Samuel Tilden from Ohio, who basically had a lot to do with exposing the corruption of the Republican Party. And he won the popular vote. However, a few states had electoral votes that were being disputed. with those electoral votes being disputed, if they were to go to Rutherford B. Hayes, he would have win the Electoral College vote, thus the election. So it gets kind of messy. Congress tries to soothe over the issue, but it wounds down to them making a compromise and convincing the Democrats to swing the vote in Hayes' direction and thereby ending Reconstruction. So Hayes becomes the president. The federal government removes troops from the South, and a few other items, such as allowing some appointees on Hayes's cabinet. And although Tilden wins the popular vote, he loses the election, and the election is decided through the Compromise of 1877, and thus Reconstruction is at an end. Or is it? Here are two documents I want you to look at. This is from Thomas Nast's The Political Cartoonist, Harper's Weekly, October 24th, 1874. Take a good look at this and think before you respond. There's more in there than you think, all right? Your tacos to complete. And then there's the last document you need to look at, William Dunning's comment on the Reconstruction, specifically dealing with the scalawags and carpetbaggers. And there's your hippo, and you'll be done. You done good, real good. I will be available. You feel free to privately message me if you have any troubles.